Hello again, Psych 370 students, and welcome to another video lecture for week 15. In this one, I'll be discussing an interesting phenomenon called over-imitation, and I'll also say a little bit about a related phenomenon called generalized imitation. I'll talk about over-imitation first, and guys, that's basically just what it sounds like. So over-imitation has to do with how when we imitate actions, when we learn to imitate the behavior of a model, we don't just imitate the actions that are actually necessary to obtain a reinforcer or to avoid a punisher. We also tend to imitate things that the model clearly didn't need to do to produce the consequence that occurred. So over-imitation is about this tendency that we have to imitate even the unnecessary, irrelevant behaviors that a model performs. So for example, in one study on this, kids watched an adult model. Okay, these are 3 to 5-year-old children in this study, and each child would watch as an adult model took a jar that had a toy dinosaur inside. The model tapped on the jar with a feather, and then the model unscrewed the lid and retrieved the dinosaur. Then the model would ask the child to identify which actions he took that he actually needed to take to get the dinosaur out, and which of his actions were unnecessary. So, what did the model have to do, and what did the model not have to do to get the dinosaur? That's what the kid would be asked about. And there were several different demonstrations like that, with the model solving several different problems. So during this first part of the study, the kids were essentially just watching the model do stuff and then trying to identify the silly or irrelevant things that the model did. I actually have a quick video for you from this part of the study, so I'll show that to you now.
Ready? Okay, there he is. All right. So, Josh, did I have to tap on the jar with this feather to get the dinosaur out?
No.
No? Did I have to take off this lid?
Yeah.
You're right. So, you know what? That's what this game is about. Sometimes I'm going to do silly things like tapping on the jar with the feather, things that don't really help me get the dinosaur. And I want you to watch really carefully so you can tell me what they are, okay? Okay, good. Let's do that.
Okay, so if the kid correctly identified the necessary and unnecessary steps that the model took to get the dinosaur, then they would get praised and told they're right. If not, then they'd get corrected and they'd be told what the silly action was. So they're basically being trained here to identify the silly actions, right? The unnecessary actions. And again, they got 8 different demonstrations like that, where the model would include some irrelevant, unnecessary steps while retrieving the toy. And then they'd ask the kids about which steps were necessary and which ones were silly. That was the first phase. Then in the next phase, the model would show each kid a new apparatus, like this puzzle box. He'd tell him there was a toy turtle inside, and then the kid would watch as the model got the toy out of the box. Like before, the model would include some unnecessary steps in his demonstration, and then the model would leave the room and he'd encourage the kids to get the turtle however they wanted. So the kids didn't necessarily have to do exactly what the model did to get the turtle. They were told that they could get the turtle however they wanted to, but still, most of the children did imitate even the silly, unnecessary actions that the model took. I also have a video for you about that part of the study, so I'll show that to you now.
There he is.
I got him.
Okay, so the kid clearly didn't need to remove that red bolt from the top or tap the wand through the hole in the top before he retrieved the turtle, but he still did. So he over imitated, right? He imitated those unnecessary actions. In fact, even when the model warned the kids that he might do some silly and unnecessary things, and even when he specifically told them not to do anything silly, to only do what they had to do, it didn't matter. When they retrieved the turtle, those kids still tended to imitate the unnecessary actions. By contrast, kids in a control group were asked to get the turtle without ever seeing a model do it first, and they tended to be successful at retrieving the turtle. But as you can see in this graph, they were far less likely to perform the irrelevant behaviors. And so the kids who did see the model definitely exhibited this tendency to over imitate the model. Now, you might say, yeah, but those are kids, right? Surely adults would not be so silly as to imitate things that are clearly irrelevant to the task at hand, right? Wrong. Research has shown that the tendency to over imitate actually increases with age. So, for example, these pictures are from a study that was quite similar to the one I just described. So, in this one, adults and children had to open a door, insert a wand into the hole, attach it to a sticker that was inside this box, and then pull the sticker out of the box. So, it was a pretty similar problem to the one you just saw in that last video. But again, each participant saw a solution being demonstrated first by a model before they tried it themselves. And again, that demonstration included several irrelevant actions, like removing this bolt and jamming the wand through this hole in the top of the box. Now, some of the participants were 3 and 5-year-old children, others were adults, and some of the participants saw a child demonstrating how to get the sticker, whereas for others, the model was an adult. But the important result was that, as you can see in this graph, regardless of who the model was, the adult observers were significantly more likely to over imitate the unnecessary actions than either of the younger groups were. And other studies have also reported similar findings where the tendency to over imitate is actually more pronounced in older individuals than it is in younger ones. So, over imitation is a curious phenomenon. The question, of course, is why we do this. Because it seems kind of foolish, right? I mean, why would we imitate actions that are clearly not necessary? Actions that, if you asked us, we could probably tell you are unnecessary. Well, psychologists have come up with several explanations for over-imitation, and some of those theories are described on pages 291 and 292 of your textbook. So, for example, one idea on this is that we over-imitate because it's a way to make sure that we get the same consequence that the model did. So it's like we figure, well, if I do exactly what they did, then I'll get exactly what they did. And then with further practice, we can sort of streamline our behavior and cut out the unnecessary stuff. So that's one explanation of over-imitation. But another explanation of it basically views over-imitation as an example of generalized imitation, what we call generalized imitation. And guys, the main idea here with the concept of generalized imitation is that when we imitate an action and then get a reinforcer afterward, what's been reinforced is not only the specific behavior that we just imitated, but also the general tendency to imitate. So, what we learn is not just to repeat that particular behavior, we also learn that in the future, doing as others do is likely to get reinforced. So again, we acquire this general tendency to imitate other people's behavior. So our experiences kind of teach us that that strategy is one that pays off pretty well. So that's what generalized imitation is all about. And it's a pretty well established phenomenon. So I want to tell you about a classic study now that provided some of the earliest evidence for it. And the study was done with preschool aged children as participants. And the researchers, Donald Baer and James Sherman, had those kids watch a cowboy puppet who modeled 4 distinct actions. So the puppet was the model in this study, and the behaviors that that puppet would perform included nodding its head, opening and closing its mouth, saying nonsense words, and pressing a lever. Okay, so 4 actions being modeled here by the puppet. Now, if a child imitated one of those first 3 behaviors, then the puppet would reinforce the child for that by saying things like, very good, or you're really smart. And as a result, the kids obviously increased how often they performed those behaviors. But The interesting result was that they also tended to press the lever more often, even though they never got reinforced for pressing the lever. Now, the puppet pressed the lever. That was one of the behaviors that the puppet modeled. But when the kids imitated that behavior, they didn't get praised for doing so the way they did when they imitated the other behaviors. So, guys, that's why it's interesting that the kids increased how much they pressed the lever. So, apparently, because they got reinforced for imitating these other three behaviors, their tendency to imitate the puppet became generalized so that they'd also imitate this fourth lever pressing behavior, even though, again, they never got reinforced for imitating that particular behavior. So, guys, the results of this study and others like it suggest that it is possible to reinforce a general tendency to imitate, meaning that we'll imitate modeled behaviors even if we've never been reinforced for them in the past, and even if they don't seem necessary to obtain a reinforcer, like praise. So, that's how the concept of generalized imitation explains both why we imitate in the first place and why we often over imitate. So the idea is basically that it's just very difficult to suppress this generalized tendency to imitate. And so we do it even when it results in over imitation. We obey that tendency so strongly, at least at first, that we copy a model's behavior to the letter, even though some of the things that we're copying aren't likely to have any real effect on whether or not we experience a certain consequence. So, in other words, just like the kids in this Bear and Sherman study generalized their imitation from some of the puppet's behaviors to all of its behaviors, we also sometimes generalize our own imitation from some of what a model does to everything that that model does. Okay, so the concept of generalized imitation fits pretty well with the research on over imitation. And generalized imitation will actually come up again next week when we go over a few theoretical issues in observational learning. That's all I have to say about it for now, though. So there's one more video lecture for this week. In that one, I talk about some of the variables that affect observational learning. So please be sure to check out that video when you get a chance. And as always, please let me know if you have any questions. Take care.